I can see we have a lot of really diverse perspectives about research participation and recruitment that'll make for a really engaging and informative discussion. So as Catherine said, my name is Dana Robinson. I am a researcher at Mathematica, and I have been involved in recruiting districts, schools, after-school programs, community colleges, and adult education providers to participate in impact and implementation studies and data collection efforts. Given that experience, I'm really excited to moderate today's webinar, Challenges and Strategies for Study Recruitment and Education Research. This webinar is the last event in a webinar series that aims to support researchers in implementing the Standards for Excellence in Education Research, or SEER. You can find the other webinars in this series on SRI's website via the link in the chat. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our thanks to the Institute of Education Sciences, or IES, to SRI and to APAM for co-sponsoring today's webinar as part of this series. I also like to thank our panelists, who I'll introduce a bit later on, for lending their perspectives to this discussion. So we'll begin today's webinar with an overview of an IES brief that was published just last fall that highlights practical strategies for researchers working to recruit districts and schools to participate in education research. We'll then introduce our panelists, who include 2 district staff who support their district's participation in research, and 2 researchers with experience leading recruitment efforts and partnering with districts. Our panelists will share a bit about how the content in the brief resonates with their experiences, and then we'll spend most of our time on a Q&A where panelists will answer your questions about this important topic. Along those lines, we encourage you to enter questions for the panelists in the chat throughout the webinar. My colleague, Lauren Schur, principal researcher here at Mathematica, will be monitoring the chat and helping field questions from the audience. We'll try to address as many questions as we can during the Q&A with panelists, and then Lauren will also be sharing links in the chat to the resources we referenced during the webinar. All right. So IES developed these Standards for Excellence in Education Research, or SEER, to encourage researchers to think beyond simply designing internally valid studies. So these standards prompt researchers to consider how to design and carry out studies that will yield relevant and actionable evidence. SEER covers 9 different topic areas that are shown on this slide and will be linked in the chat, one of which is focused on designing studies whose findings generalize to intended populations. In 2022, IES published a guide authored by Beth Tipton and Rob Olson titled Enhancing the Generalizability of Impact Studies in Education. And you can access this guide via the QR code that's on this slide or the link in the chat. And this guide recommends identifying a focal population for a research study and then recruiting a sample of districts and schools that represent that focal population. During the development of the guide, a lot of reviewers noted that researchers really need strategies to help them successfully implement that recommendation. So although the generalizability guide provides some suggestions, IES decided to fund the development of a separate brief focused entirely on this question of challenges and strategies related to recruitment. So while the development of that generalizability guide prompted the initial motivation for a brief focused on recruitment strategies, there are really a number of reasons why we're discussing this topic. And it's really clear from the interest in this webinar that study recruitment is top of mind for researchers, for district leaders, and for funders. Recruitment is obviously an essential component of many studies, surveys, or other types of data collection. The goal is to recruit a sample that's large enough and reflects the population of interest, so the study findings can be generalizable. Recruitment also really sets the stage for the rest of the study. Building those strong relationships with districts and schools through recruitment lays the foundation for successful study implementation and data collection. At the same time, recruitment is very challenging. It's an involved task where you're basically selling or pitching the importance of the study to prospective participants, and that can be really hard to navigate. And while recruitment has always been a challenge, there's some growing concern that's become even more challenging in recent years as districts and schools may be understaffed or focused on helping students catch up after losses they'd experienced during the pandemic. Although at times difficult, what makes recruitment possible is that it's very collaborative and it supports important goals that are shared by researchers and educators, whether it's understanding the impact of an intervention or documenting how the nation's schools are meeting students' needs. Recruitment is a really common task across different types of education research, which presents an opportunity for shared tools, problem solving, and learning, and is why we're all gathered here today. Given that recruitment is both important and challenging, researchers might be looking for strategies that support their recruitment efforts. I'm now going to share an overview of a brief published by IES last fall titled Practical Strategies for Recruiting Districts and Schools for Education Impact Studies. As the title suggests, this brief focuses on strategies to address common challenges researchers might face in recruiting districts and schools to participate in impact studies. My colleagues and I, Linda Rosenberg, Alejandro Espinoza, and Eric Zeidman, developed this brief, and it was published by IES in October of 2023. And you can access the brief again via the QR code that's on this slide or the link that will be to the brief that will be added to the chat. The brief is primarily intended for newer researchers who conduct randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, to evaluate the effectiveness of education interventions. Experienced researchers might already be familiar with some of the content of the brief, which is why it might be most useful to newer researchers, but experienced researchers and recruiters might still benefit from considering some of these strategies. The brief is really not meant to be a comprehensive guide on how to recruit districts and schools for impact studies. There's a lot to say about recruitment, and when we were developing the brief, we would often remind ourselves that this is not meant to be like a recruitment 101 guide. The brief really focuses specifically on challenges and strategies for researchers to consider to help design and implement successful recruitment efforts. Although the brief focuses on recruiting for RCTs, a lot of the challenges are similar to those faced in recruiting for quasi-experimental studies, data collection efforts, or implementation studies. The brief was informed by the authors and their colleagues' experiences from recent recruitment efforts for federal and foundation-funded impact studies, as well as some interviews we conducted with some selected district staff about their experiences participating in research. The strategies in the brief focus on these 4 factors that may play an increasingly important role in affecting a district's or school's ability and willingness to participate in research. I'm going to introduce each of these factors and briefly discuss the accompanying strategies, but in the brief, you can read a lot more details and examples of how researchers implemented these strategies. First factor that might influence whether a district or school participates in a study is the alignment between the focus of the study and the district's or school's priorities and needs. Districts and schools are grappling with a really seemingly growing set of needs, so it makes sense that they might only consider research efforts that align with a strategic priority or that help address one of their most pressing needs. This slide introduces 3 strategies researchers can consider to help address this factor. The first is to learn about the shared priorities of those you are recruiting and try to align the focus of the study with those priorities. One way to do this is to have conversations with key groups that would be involved in the research. So for example, to design a study to inform after-school programs, researchers interviewed state administrators, staff of foundations that support after-school programs, and other practitioners and leaders in the field. And then through these conversations, researchers learned that improving students' social and emotional skills was really a common priority in the after-school community. So based on this input, researchers then chose to study an intervention that aimed to support students' social and emotional skills. Another strategy to consider is offering targeted supports that help districts and schools address a need beyond the no-cost access to the study's intervention. These supports could include things like helping districts and schools sustain the study's intervention after the study ends, organizing a peer learning community for districts and schools participating in the study, providing access to technology or technical support, or holding a learning session to help district and school decision makers interpret and use the study findings. Researchers may want to think about including these kinds of supports in their initial requests for study funding by emphasizing that offering these benefits to districts and schools may be a worthwhile investment to encourage their participation and increase the likelihood that the study succeeds. Lastly, it's really important for researchers to communicate to districts and schools exactly how the study addresses their priorities and needs. This could include partnering with educators or others trusted in the field to develop the recruitment materials and build interest in the study, as well as building relationships with staff at each prospective district or school who can champion participation in the study. So for example, for a study of teacher leadership, researchers partnered with former educators and teacher leaders to recruit districts and schools. A former educator first introduced the study and explained to district administrators the connection between the study and the district's strategic priorities. And then former teacher leaders joined recruitment conversations to promote the study and speak from firsthand experience about the benefits of the intervention. The next factor that may influence whether a district or school participates in a study is limited staff capacity. So even if a study aligns with their priorities, districts and schools might be reluctant to add responsibilities or new tasks to educators' already heavy workloads. One clear way researchers might address this is to compensate district and school staff for all the time they spend participating in the study. We encourage researchers to think expansively here and consider compensation for time spent completing all study activities, such as implementing the intervention, attending trainings, completing data collection activities, and having additional staff, such as a substitute teacher, cover time when regular staff are participating in study activities. Researchers could also consider ways to make it easier for districts and schools to participate in the study. So when designing the study, researchers should consider how districts and schools will implement the intervention alongside their existing practices. This could include things like providing training options for districts and schools on the intervention, modifying the timeline for implementing the intervention to avoid a busy period like the beginning of school year or state testing time, working with district and school leaders to integrate the intervention into normal operations, such as accessing the study's technology and intervention through the district's learning management system that students are already familiar with, and then considering whether there are components of the intervention that could be optional for districts and schools who want to participate but have more limited capacity. Similarly, researchers should think about ways to limit the burden of data collection activities by using administrative or other existing data, like student assessment data or a district school climate survey, whenever it's possible. When that primary data collection is necessary, researchers should be flexible in how and when they go about collecting the data. So for example, for a study of education technology tools to support writing, researchers avoided collecting student writing assessments for a study during the first month of the school year, when teachers noted they were focused on establishing norms and building relationships with new students. While very common to all of us in education research, districts and schools do not typically use random assignment to decide who gets access to a new tool or intervention. And so some districts and schools might be wary of random assignment because of concerns about fairness or potential disruption to collaboration between schools and teachers. To address this, researchers should be very transparent about random assignment and explain its value in understanding whether a potentially promising intervention is effective or worth future investment. And then different ways to explain random assignment might resonate in different contexts. So for example, some districts might want to introduce a new intervention in a few schools at a time if they want to pilot it or don't have the resources or capacity to provide the intervention to all schools at once. In this scenario, researchers could explain that random assignment is a fair way to select which districts will implement the intervention first. If districts and schools understand the reasons for random assignment, they might be more willing to participate in the study despite initial concerns about fairness or interruption to collaboration. Researchers can also consider ways to make random assignment more palatable when designing the study before recruitment even begins, by considering what districts and schools' potential concerns might be. So this includes deciding whether the study will randomly assign students, teachers, or schools or another unit to receive the intervention. So for example, in a study of career navigation in adult education programs, researchers were initially planning to randomly assign career navigators within the same program so that one navigator would receive the study's training intervention and the other would not. But adult education practitioners who were part of the study's advisory group really cautioned that this would be a big barrier for programs because navigators within a program often collaborate and work together. So based on this insight, researchers decided to widen the unit of random assignment to involve whole programs rather than navigators within a program. I know there are a number of trade-offs to consider when making decisions about random assignment, such as power and contamination and cost, but recruitment should be one of those considerations when you're weighing these different trade-offs. Lastly, districts and schools may be hesitant to share data because of concerns about student and staff privacy. I know many of us may have built a strong relationship with an interested district only to have their participation in the study fall through when it comes time to negotiate the memorandum of understanding or data sharing agreement. And districts and schools have a responsibility to protect student and staff members' personal information. And so during recruitment, researchers should convey that they share this same responsibility and clearly explain how the study will use and protect data. Researchers might need to spend time meeting with district's legal teams or presenting at a school board meeting or meeting with a research office, and be prepared to tap into their organization's legal and data experts to answer some specific questions when needed. Researchers might also need to be flexible to respect districts' individual policies around study agreements, research applications, and consent. So, for example, for a study of school improvement networks, researchers adapted to each participating district's policy on data sharing. There were some larger districts that had internal research applications and data use agreement templates, while some smaller districts preferred a memorandum of understanding or a letter of commitment from researchers. Researchers should also be prepared to offer different options to obtain consent from staff, parents, and students, including using a district's consent form template if there is one, obtaining passive or active consent, and using existing communication channels, such as sending an electronic consent form to parents through the school's learning management system. We invite you to read more about these challenges and strategies in the brief, but there are a few things they all really have in common. The challenges and strategies highlight the importance of designing and presenting a study that is a mutually beneficial partnership between researchers and educators. So something that districts and schools will be excited to participate in, despite the competing demands for their time and energy. This means that researchers should consider recruitment and study design and planning decisions, consult diverse perspectives outside of the research team to make those decisions, and then be prepared to adapt their decisions to districts and schools' needs and contexts once recruitment is underway. This approach can both help support the recruitment effort and increase the chances of conducting a successful impact study that produces relevant and actionable evidence for educators and policymakers. So as I said, this brief is not at all intended to be a comprehensive guide on how to recruit districts and schools for impact studies, and the perspectives in the brief might not reflect the experience of all researchers and educators. So to expand on the content in the brief and offer their own perspectives, we've invited a panel with experience participating in and recruiting for education studies. So please welcome Sarah Dixon from Chicago Public Schools, Renat Freed from Oakland Unified School District, Jason Snipes from West Ed, and Anya Corky from American Institutes for Research. I'll introduce each panelist and invite them to share some opening remarks. After that, we'll all come back together and I'll lead a Q&A with the panelists. So please continue to add questions for panelists to the chat as they're speaking, and then we'll come back to those questions and they'll respond during the Q&A portion. All right. So first up is Sarah Dixon. Sarah is the Director of External Research at Chicago Public Schools. In this role, she develops the strategic direction of district research partnerships, manages and supports external research partners, and oversees the implementation of research projects across the district. In conjunction with the district's senior leadership, Sarah works to establish priority research areas and then develop research projects to support the improvement of practice in those areas. So Sarah, what factor or strategy from the brief most resonates with your experience leading Chicago Public Schools Research Office?
Thank you so much, Dana. I would say that what really resonated with me and felt incredibly just true and accurate was the factor of limited staff capacity. I think that what I've certainly noticed is that A district participating in research, a school, a teacher, a principal participating in research is a larger time demand than I think it sometimes seems from the outset. It's not as simple as saying, yes, I'll implement this intervention. There's a lot that goes into it from the side of the end of those who are implementing the intervention or the research. I would even say at the district end, the work that goes into getting those agreements in place, into sharing the data, into preparing the data, into working with all of the elements that go into setting up a high quality research project. And I think that just really has resonated with me as something that I think it would be great just if researchers could and districts could work together to be more accurate about what is the time commitment, what is the investment that the district needs to make in order to participate in research, and understanding, what is going to align well with the work that's already happening, what is going to truly be extra work, and thinking about what that means in terms of not just compensation, but the value of the research, right? So I think that monetary compensation is absolutely something that can be helpful, but I think it's also about making sure that districts and those who are participating in research really feel that the research they're participating in is valuable and the learnings that will be generated from the research will be meaningful and accessible to them.
Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that emphasis on being transparent and accurate in your assessment of the time and making sure that that time produces something valuable for educators. Now I'd like to introduce Renat Freed. Renat is a research associate at Oakland Unified School District, where she focuses on elementary literacy data and works with external researchers to support the district's participation in research. Renat has worked with researchers from Mathematica, Northwestern University's Center for Education Efficacy, Excellence, and Equity, Harvard's Graduate School of Education, and the Center on Reinventing Public Education at Arizona State University. So Renat, given your experience supporting Oakland USD's participation in research, what factor or strategy from the brief resonates with you?
Thank you so much, Dana. Yeah, the entire brief really resonated with me. And the number one thing is the co-creation of the project with, or a sense that the project really aligns very, very deeply with the district's highest priorities. And I think there's so much great research that can be done, and most of it's interesting, but for it to fit into a school district that's dealing with an unbelievable amount of work and incoming information, that having it really sit at the very top of our priorities is, I think, essential. And having somebody in the district to really champion and co-own the project so it feels really rooted in the district is incredibly helpful. So that's the piece I think that's really important, and refining the project with that person in the district so it really matches the urgent, what's top of mind, what's the question we're trying to answer that we can work on together, leads to a really successful project.
Thanks, Renat. Yeah, appreciate that emphasis on co-creation whenever that's possible, and just a focus on those, top of mind, most urgent needs that are on the top of the list. Now I'd like to introduce Jason Snipes. Jason is a senior research scientist at the Director of Applied Research at the Regional Educational Laboratory West at WestEd. He has over 27 years of experience conducting rigorous applied research with a particular emphasis on collaborating with districts and schools to develop, implement, evaluate, and disseminate strategies to improve outcomes among Black and Latino students. Jason currently co-leads a research practice partnership with the San Francisco Unified School District that's focused on achieving equitable discipline outcomes for Black students. So Jason, what factor or strategy from the brief resonates with your experience collaborating with districts and schools on research efforts?
Thanks. I just want to expand or double down on what Rob just said in terms of the alignment of the research with the priorities and the essential connection between that and having a champion or champions within the district that really care about it. The work, which to me really means that, as Renat sort of alluded to, the work needs to rather than coming to a district after it's fully baked, and you have this great idea for a great research project with a great design, research is most effective when it's developed in collaboration with partners and emerges from agreements on what is important for the district substantively, and therefore what questions they really want to answer. And there may be some tensions between this and generalizability, but in my experience, the main hindrance to effective evaluation and understanding evaluation is actually successful, thorough implementation, which you only get when you get this kind of buy-in. And so if I end up doing a project that is focused on a set of districts or places where we've really agreed on a set of priorities, and I have to work to figure out how that generalizes and think about weighting or just have some limitations, but I have districts that are committed before we submit the grant proposal, and then are committed to the project and the ideas themselves. You get a better study with higher levels of implementation. And all that said, things are going to happen after you do all that. People are going to change, staff members are going to change, leaders are going to change, rules are going to change, crises are going to happen, and you just have to be willing to work with folks. And that is why you have to have some people in the district that truly care. Otherwise, the crisis of the day comes along, and rightfully so, the district folks say, hey, or the school folks or the state folks say, hey, we have to focus on this, and we'll get back to your project when we can get back to your project, because it's your project, not our project.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I really love that reframe at the end, from your project to our project, really that co-ownership and co-interest in the research effort. Last but not least, we have Anya Corky. Anya is a managing researcher at the American Institutes for Research, and she has over 20 years of experience conducting large national impact evaluations and specializes in recruitment and implementation oversight. Anya has successfully led recruitment of districts and schools for several national IES evaluations on topics including teacher professional development, parent engagement, and multi-tiered systems of support for students. So Anya would love to hear about a factor or strategy from the brief that resonates with your experience recruiting districts and schools to participate in impact evaluations.
Sure, thank you. I think I'm going to be very boring because I'm going to be saying the same thing, which is really the alignment of the priorities and needs of the districts and schools. But I'm coming from a little bit different point of view than Jason is, because I am really typically working on contract research where the study is pretty readily baked when we start the recruitment. So we have some recruitment criteria and we are doing a lot of outreach to find districts to participate in these studies. But it doesn't mean that there's no relationship and partnership building. Like, for the study to be really successfully implemented and having that really high quality of implementation, the recruitment really needs to be that trust building. It needs to be that relationship building, building those partnerships where you spent months to discuss, is this study really a good fit for the districts and schools' needs? And then really work those kinks out of it, like what is working, what is not working, and really have those conversations which take a long time. So even when you have kind of a study that is more, in my opinion, a little bit more readily already assigned, like designed, you can still do really successful recruitment where you can really, find participants who want to participate in the evaluation or in the study because they see that what you are studying is really aligned with their priorities and needs. So that's one thing. The other thing that really resonates with me, though, is also the staff capacity, because oftentimes districts see these larger scale evaluations as an opportunity to try and pilot something which might be a new way of doing things in their districts. So these studies can provide really, useful professional development, technical assistance, the intervention that they may want to try out that they haven't had ability to do on their own. So that is a really important aspect as well. And these studies, large-scale impact studies, which are well-funded, can offer those resources for districts to really participate and try these new things out. So that is also something important to keep in mind, that staff capacity and building that ability to potentially scale up later on and sustain what they learn in these studies is also important. And the last piece, which was not directly mentioned in those four different things, to me is really kind of related to equity in a sense that Especially in these logical evaluations, we often, the funding is there to provide really resources for districts and schools to participate in these studies. So for me, it's really important that we actually go out there and we do really extensive outreach to find different partners. So we don't always, go and just have my Rolex out and figure out, hey, who has been participating before? And I'm always targeting the same places to do the research and providing those opportunities to participate in research. For me, it's important that we actually do really, really good outreach, not just because of the generalizability and we are trying to recruit certain kind of places, but to really be able to offer the opportunity for as many districts as possible to learn about this opportunity and give them a choice to participate if they want to.
Thanks, Anya. I really loved how you turned the limited staff capacity from a barrier to a potential asset, and that the study can try to support the capacity of districts and doing something they're interested in that they might not be able to have the time or resources to do on your own. All right. So now that you've heard from everyone, I want to open up for a Q&A with our panelists, and I will stop sharing my screen just so that we can see everyone. Okay. Oh, sorry, everything's moving. Okay, so please continue to add your questions for the panelists in the chat, but I would like to begin with a question for all of our panelists. So we know in the brief that there is some evidence that recruitment has become more challenging in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, where districts and schools are balancing, increased needs of students and staff, some ongoing staffing shortages, and a lot of these competing research and data collection requests. So from your perspective, how has recruitment and study participation changed in recent years? What do you think is really driving these changes, and how have you or your district or team adapted in response to these changes? So Sarah, it would be great if you could start us off.
Thank you so much. One thing that I think is true is that the pandemic really brought to the light a lot of inequities in our education systems. And so I think that since the pandemic, if we're even in a sense the pandemic world, I think that there has been a lot more focus from the district side as well as from the state side, as well as from the side of researchers, to be thinking about promoting equity through research and thinking about research as a tool of equity. And that is great. That is absolutely something that we want to see. However, doing more equitable research, it requires more from everybody, right? It requires the researchers to begin their efforts earlier. It requires more work up front to do that co-design or co-creation, and it requires more from those on the district or the practice side who are being asked to weigh in on things that they haven't had to weigh in on before. And so I love to see the increased need for engagement in terms of the research process and life cycle. However, I don't know really that anyone, funders, districts, research organizations, has really embedded the need for the resources, the supports, and the time to do that work into the process of doing that work, right? So it does tend to feel, I think, not only are we being asked as a district to participate in more research, we're being asked to participate in more intensive research that is more time consuming, and it is for a good purpose. But I think that we need to work a little bit on empowering district folks to ask for what they need. We also need to work on ensuring that everyone kind of can come to the table with the same, with shared expectations and values, and a shared commitment to the work, which takes time and partnership and trust, and building in that trust building and that relationship building into the research process. I would love to see more projects taking time for, a planning year before moving into implementation.
Thanks, Sarah. I think that's a really important point. And, you acknowledge that these are, we want districts to be more involved in research, but we need to have them have the, time and resources and space in order to do so. So I think that's a really important way that things have changed, and that, you're thinking about adapting. Anya, do you have any thoughts around how things have changed, what's driving those changes, and how you might have adapted?
I do think that I have been recruiting for like 20 years, and I do think that there is not, it has been a gradual progress over time, but I think COVID definitely kind of fastened the process of, in some sense, making recruitment needing to be much more time consuming and having more of those conversations and making sure that there is a larger set of players, so to be, or stakeholders in the districts involved in those conversations right from the beginning, right? So you have that larger scale buy-in, and that takes time. And it also means that your recruitment, it's not one person business. You're always having a team of people who need to recruit in these studies. So you need a really good team of people with different levels and different kinds of skills, right? Because there are different processes that you have to handle at the same time. There is the financial issues, the MOU issues, the research application issues, but also that really important aspect of having those conversations about, hey, what is this research going to be doing in your schools, with your staff? What is the time commitment that we are asking from them? What are the supports that we can provide to them to do this implementation and do it really well? And having those conversations and making sure that it's transparent conversation, that everybody is truly on the same page, so that there is going to be no like, oh, I didn't understand that this is going to be part of this research when the research starts, because those are hard to fix later on. So the process needs to be transparent. It has to be, longish. It has to have multiple conversations, and everybody has to be on the same page. And it takes time, and therefore it is more expensive, right? So that's just the reality. Like, it needs to be budgeted in the research, that it's going to be taking more time. And the other thing is, I personally, and this is my personal belief, I do believe that districts should be thinking about it in the point of view of like, what are the kind of costs that are related to research, which are kind of hidden costs, right? There are costs of, even if we would be paying staff time and we would be hiring staff, additional personnel for the district to do some of the study activities, it's still going to be requiring some of the district resources, like the HR, hiring these people, providing them computers, workspace, all of these things. And those should be also incorporated into the idea of what does it actually mean to do applied research in a field, in a real context where you're employing real people in real environments. So there are hidden costs that we don't typically think about when we are doing research.
Thanks, Anya. And I think that really harkens back to something that Sarah said earlier about like transparency and trying to be more accurate and transparent and think through all the different costs and commitments that are associated with research, and how important that can be to get right from the beginning. So as you said, you're not trying to make up for things later on. Renat, I know you have a lot of experience working with external researchers. How have you seen things change in recent years, and how have you adapted in response to those changes?
I think that there's been a very sincere effort in the district to focus and really focus on our strategic plan and a handful of priorities. And there is a tendency just for there to be a lot of clutter in our attention clutter that builds up over time, especially as there are changes in curriculum and in practices and guidance that happens all the time, and people don't let go, and there's all this incoming requests from the community and community partners, and it seems like every little thing is just a little thing, but cumulatively there's a big drag, an attention drag, and that's costly in the most important thing that I think we have, which is our attention. So I think we're really trying to, as research requests and researchers come in, or as we're thinking about research priorities, to align them with those top priorities and what's really important. And a practice I think that's shifted is really having a requirement that we have an internal sponsor. So somebody in a leadership role in our school has to be in agreement that this is important. I think we're very protective of our teachers and our principals who are deluged all the time and overworked. And so just being really increasingly protective about like, what is this going to add to their plate? And compensation is lovely, but I think as people on the panel have been really sensitive, like that's not really why anybody's in the business. We're here to try to take care of kids, and things that come in that take away from that attention. I think we're trying to be more protective about it. So I think that's been the shift. We've had a lot of great partnerships, and increasingly the ones that have felt really rewarding for me are ones where, first of all, like there, as Anya mentioned, someone's bringing added capacity. So someone's saying we're joined together to do a research project, and someone's able to do the kind of statistical work that we can't do in our research department, but is answering a question that's really vital. Like, which of these 3 programs we're going to choose? And I think another helpful quality is sensitivity toward the implementation challenges, because of course, many things work great when they're implemented very well, but that doesn't happen very often because that's really where the work is. So researchers that are very attentive and are willing to bring a qualitative lens to that question, like, okay, in a research study, we were able to implement this very well, but is that realistic in an ongoing way? So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Renat. And Jason, I think that sounds kind of similar to some of the work that you do with your applied research. So do you have any thoughts on this question?
Sorry, I was looking at a question in the chat that I want to respond to at the same time. I think the most important thing to keep in mind is that even if it's a small thing, one more thing just seems so incredibly onerous to folks, particularly at the building and school level. And in the attempt to recover from the at-home learning or lack thereof that occurred during the pandemic, teachers have placed a real priority on trying to just pump as much knowledge as they can and support as they can for the children in their classrooms. So that means that, though, and I can think an incentive is actually a necessary condition, what is more important is being able to communicate clearly and really genuinely working on something that is going to actually contribute to their kids' progress and well-being, and being able to articulate how that's going to, work in like 3 sentences. And, supportive of that are things like infographics that are designed for, teachers and principals to understand why this is actually something that's important to do. And again, this all has to be in the context, as I was alluding to, of things that are actually important district priorities. One thing that I do find, troubling that just happens, right, is that because, leadership changes, you'll be working and along with folks on what feels like that's line with their priorities. And then there's some leadership change at the very top or in the middle, and those priorities can shift. And that's just, that's just life in the big city, and you gotta, sort of deal with it. But I think to the extent that you're really clear about the benefit to the district and the schools, and what that often means, particularly in non-contract research and REL studies where you can do this, is providing something to them before the 3 years it takes your study to complete and the 1.5 years it takes to you get your journal article published, right? They don't care about your journal article, and they ought not to. You need to be thinking about what I can provide to the district. And as a researcher, you're trained often to think about I only say what I know for sure. And if you're going to work with a district, you have to let that go. You have to say, this is what I know for sure, and this is what I'm willing to say, I think, based on what I understand of the evidence thus far. And I think that makes you a useful and effective partner. And, you give the appropriate caveats, but, you say, this is my best estimation of what I've learned about what it takes to implement this, or what we're learning about whether or not students can do this, or what we're learning about whether or not we're seeing any progress. And we'll have better answers for you later, but this is our answer now. And, promising that up front and following through on those commitments to your partners is really key.
Anya, I see a hand raised. If you have something to add, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I could not agree more with Jason about the importance of being able to partner in a way that there is like it's an ongoing partnership where the school staff, the people who are doing the implementation can feel that they're being supported and they are learning in an ongoing manner, even throughout the whole research. Even when we cannot say, hey, we might be able to say, this is the impact of this study or this intervention like 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 years later. But we can be providing those supports, and they can be basically learn from their own data and also their own way of doing things, like whether this is working for them. And I really would love to have the people who are helping the schools and the school staff to implement the interventions to be able to have those conversations. Like, we as the evaluators of an intervention cannot be, providing data, but they provide those ongoing technical assistance and often the conversations with the school staff, and are that ongoing, brain power and that partner throughout these research projects. So the more we could kind of make that to be really important part of the research study, I think better the acceptance and the way of doing research is. So I really loved what you said, Jason. I think that's so important.
I'm going to open it up for some audience questions, but Sarah, first, I see your hand raised. Go ahead and weigh in.
I wanted to triple down on what Jason said about making sure that we're really talking about interim findings, preliminary findings, and making meaning of the data and the analysis that we're seeing along the way. I think that's also not just because so districts can utilize that information to improve their practice as they go, but also so that they can help sanity check what we're seeing in the data, right? Districts have a lot of knowledge and understanding about the context in which the data is literally being created. And that is so important to researchers. And if researchers are confused, if they're like, there's a trend and we don't know why we're seeing it, who might know? The people who are in the schools and in the district. And so that's not just a benefit for the district to be hearing about findings along the way, but which I completely agree is outstandingly important. It's also a key moment for researchers to be learners and to say, help us make sense of this data. Help us share your expertise as those on the ground doing this work with us so that we can make meaning together and make something more powerful.
Can I jump
Thanks,
in as
everyone.
well? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to tag on to one more piece, another really successful thing that's happened with some of our partnerships is when there's a willingness of the researcher to come back at the end of the study and share during and after, sometimes multiple times. And it's been, there's been times where researchers have sort of walked away and we haven't heard them and then had a hard time getting them back. That's been not as great as when a researcher's like, I'm willing to share my findings out and do it with multiple audiences, because it's very difficult to get everybody in one meeting at one time and it takes time for information to sink through, and to have them help us think through how to implement or what the implications are.
Great. Thank you. I think this is all a great discussion. I'm also seeing a lot of great discussion in the chat, both questions and then people chiming in to like answer, offer their perspective on someone else's questions, which is really exciting to see. I wanted to open things up with a question from the audience that I think touches on, two key themes that we've talked about so far. One being like co-creation between researchers and district staff, and then the other being capacity and time of district staff. So question is that do districts, many of whom have limited capacity, really have the capacity to co-formulate or co-refine researchers' focus with researchers? And then what pieces of the work or conversations that we're talking about would you suggest doing in a co-creation setting with a district before study funding is in place or before you have a grant identified versus after funding is awarded? And so since this question really focuses on district's capacity to work on co-creation, would love to hear from our district panelists, and researchers feel free to chime in after on their thoughts on this question.
I can go ahead and get us started or not. So I think that's a great question. And I think one of the important things to remember is that what I think I'm going to say it's relationship building again, right? So if a researcher that the CPS hasn't worked with before comes in and says, hey, work with me on this thing and put all of this time and effort into something that we don't even know if we're going to get funded, yes, I might be more reluctant to do that, right? Or to just kind of dive in and commit so much of my time and energy to someone whose work I'm not familiar with, who hasn't worked with the district before. But this is, I think, also a good place to plug. Yeah, build those relationships as you work with districts. Stay in touch with them. Continue to do briefings. Continue to be like, hey, I don't know if you saw this was written up in Chalkbeat, or we are presenting about this work that we did in your district, you know, even though that was 5 years ago, just wanted to flag for you that we're going to be at AERA this year. You know, keeping in touch with districts and building that relationship means that when there is something that comes up, there's more trust there, and there's more understanding that, yes, this is something that can be productive, and people will be more willing to invest the time ahead of, say, you know, a grant deadline. Personally, yes, please, 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 please work with your districts before you apply for the grant. More than just getting a letter of support. Make sure that the district knows what is required of them if they receive the grant. Make sure that you haven't just, you know, sent a letter to the superintendent and gotten a form letter of support back. Make those connections early. And I think that the earlier you can make those connections, or even just say before a grant is even posted, to say, hey, we're interested in doing something about math. We're interested in early numeracy. Hey, Sarah, can you help us talk to the central office math department so that we can understand what their priorities are, so that we can be on the lookout for ways where our expertise and your priorities match up? And if there's a funding opportunity that comes along, great. I think that so much of the what should happen before and do we have capacity, the district has capacity for good work, always, right? We always make it work. Everyone will always make it work. I think it's, do we have capacity to do pro forma co-creation, to just we don't want to feel like a checkbox that researchers are doing to say that they did co-creation. We want it to be that generative, organic process. And so, yes, if you build the relationships, the districts will find the capacity, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's not something that happens in an instant, and there's not a protocol that I can offer to say, if you follow this protocol, you will get to co-creation. I think it's much more about thinking about the long-standing relationships.
Thanks, Sarah. Renat, do you have other thoughts about how Oakland USD approaches co-creation and making time and space for that?
That was so, yeah, I'm just nodding my head vigorously because I was so well said, Sarah, and exactly right. I think the district has time for good work, but not time for compliance. Or we're trying to, you know, that's we don't want to waste time, and it's about
not time for other people's compliance.
Thank you.
Plenty of time for our own compliance.
Thank you. Exactly. So I think everything she said is really spot on. And I'm thinking, I mean, we had, I'm thinking of a project that we did with Mathematica, actually, and it's the one random control research project we've done that I know of, that we've done in my time. And it was a big effort, and the researcher, we really developed it. It was a lot of work, but we were really curious about the efficacy of a literacy intervention that we were doing in secondary, and we really worked with the researcher to write the application and to talk about what was realistic, and it was very important, so we made the time. Yeah, for sure. We have another situation where, which is a little unusual, we're partnering with Northwestern, and they're bringing some funding and have a lot of flexibility, and that's a very lovely situation in which and Sarah's a part of this project as well, where we're able to work with the researcher and really develop at the ground level what our research questions are. And it's true that we don't have the capacity to do research, the kind of research that our partners like AAR or Mathematica do, but everybody in our district has burning questions about, is what I'm doing working? Is this a good use of my time? They maybe not formulate it in a way that sounds to you like a research question, but they have them, so.
Thanks, Renat. I think that's such a good reminder, especially for researchers, that everyone is thinking about questions, even if they're not calling them research questions. Really important. Jason, I see your hand raised too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I that's the point I wanted to really emphasize, is that, you know, in some of our structures, we're encouraged to find out in like certain partnerships, oh, what are the district's research questions? I think that researchers are really good at formulating research questions. I think districts are good at identifying what's important to them, and then together you can translate that into evidence goals. And then the research team can figure, okay, if this is what you really want to learn, what's the specific question and what's the design? And then come back and say, would this meet your needs? You know, it is, you know, but sort of, you know, the districts vary in the type of, you know, research capacity that they have in their, you know, formal research capacity they have in their folks. And some people are super comfortable with that part of the process I just described, and other folks are, you know, are less so. but you don't need to have that in order to really come up with solid research questions that represent the district's priorities. So what you're really trying to do is understand those priorities and what that implies for what, you know, knowledge needs to be created or curated, you know, for the district. And I know of very few districts that don't have the capacity to explain what is important to them and what they're struggling with. And from there, you know, we can turn that into like a conversation about what we really want to learn together. You know, and I also think that, you know, it's great that the resources like the Northwestern partnership that are really amazing, and you know, funders should consider funding more of that, including the funders that decided that we didn't need research practice partnership competition anymore. And you know, our organizations like AIR, MDRC, Wested, Mathematica, et cetera, should think about the investment of resources in those partnerships outside of contract and grant funding.
Thanks, Jason. I think you raise an important point, particularly when we're talking about co-creation and some of these other questions, is that, you know, in smaller districts, they might not have a research office or like research-based staff, but they do have staff who are thinking about what they want to know. And Anya, I know you brought up the point earlier of not always going to those same larger districts that might have these research offices. So I see you have a hand raised too, but would love to hear from you any thoughts on how to work with smaller districts on things like this. Oh, you're muted.
Of course I am. So, I think that I love the co-creation idea, and when it's possible, I think it would be a lovely way of doing research. And when it's not possible though, so I would love to do co-continuation, which is a different way of doing it. Like once you have been working, even if you have been working in a research projects that were not perhaps created in a collaborative manner, but you have that, like I have been working on projects, we have like not just 1 but 2, even 3-year implementation periods, and really kind of what are the steps that you can take after your research project is kind of that implementation period is ending, to really be there still as a thought partner with the district and how to go forward. And can this be, you know, scaled up? What are the next steps? Are the people who were providing some of this technical assistance or trainings during the study still available for the district? What does it take to, you know, have a contracts with them? Like how can we continue this relationship even when it's formally over? So like not just going for co-creation, but co-continuation in some sense, and helping districts to move forward after the research part is over. When it comes to small districts, you know, that's part of the reason why I do think that, you know, when we have a chance to actually do really thorough outreach for some of these research projects, we really should be as inclusive as possible, and goes back to the generalizability also of the research results. Like, can we have those rural districts in the study? Can we have those smaller districts in the study? How do we really kind of create that study population so it's not only generalizability, but generalizability. Well, my Finnish is not working right now, but anyway, but also offering that opportunity for different kinds of districts that do not have that infrastructure ready to be participants in research. I think it's really important, and we should be actively, you know, paying attention to that as well.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks, everyone. Before we continue with questions, just want to acknowledge that we have hit the 1 hour mark. Thankfully, we set aside 90 minutes from this for this webinar, so we'll keep going to for another half an hour till 2:30 Eastern with answering your questions. But for those who do need to hop off, we'll continue to record, and this will be, you know, the panel discussion will be recorded and posted as well. All right. To shift into a next question, I think something else that has, you know, was a theme during the brief and then has come up a couple times during this discussion is flexibility. So we have a question from the audience about what might be an example of contingency planning for unforeseen changes, such as a change in priorities or a change in internal champion.
I'll start. I think that So first of all, just have to acknowledge that sometimes this stuff has, you know, an impact on your ability to get work and get the sample that you want. It just does. To the extent that you have developed credibility and trust, not just with one person, but with several places in the district, that's really important. And it's even important because a lot of times some districts have clear, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive lines of authority, and other districts have overlapping lines of authority that are, you know, kind of working together or not together to, you know, move things forward. And so you need to, you know, have multiple touch points. And then I think it also goes back to time. You have to, you know, have this this planning year, this year for you know, for recruitment and such in your plans. You used to be able to think, okay, if I get funded in April, I can get going by the fall. And that is not realistic anymore in this world. And you just have to account for that, so that if you know, have this happen, you can then have the time to kind of rebuild and have the conversations and be willing to go out and talk to people sort of in person. It's hard to plan in advance for that, except to just, you know, in your budgeting and resources, have time for to make sure you have those conversations and make those trips. And I can't emphasize enough the benefits of talking to people in person.
Thanks, Jason. Anya, feel free to weigh in. You're so muted.
I agree with everything that Jason said, and the time aspect, especially, like, build in time, because things will happen. So you may need to have to pivot. Have multiple people that you build like a coalition in the district. It's not that you have just a district champion. There's so many different people that you have to work with. It's the data collection. It's the, you know, the extant data office, it's the research office, it's like, it's, you know, it's the schools, it's the principals. Like, you have to work with all of them, and not just building time in the process, in a sense that, you know, things might go and you may need to find a new district champion and things like that. But build time to work with the district staff during the study. It's so important to be in touch, if not on a weekly basis, minimally every 2 weeks, to have the time to really have those conversations and really problem solve together. This is partnership. This is not, oh, we are doing research here. It's like, we are doing research together. So you have to be, you know, constantly making sure that the district has an opportunity, and district staff and school staff have an opportunity to let us know when things are not going well, so we can actually problem solve together, and we can be there to support the implementation and doing the right things that we need to do to make sure that things are going well. So that constant communication is really a key, and that trust, and building that trust, that when things are not going well, you feel comfortable that you can come to us and say, hey, oh, this is not really working, we need to do something. And that is, to me, that is a sign that we have been successful in our recruitment and in our implementation partnership. When I'm starting to hear from districts and district staff and school staff when they don't like something, then I know that, hey, we are there, like, we are now having a true partnership, and now we can make this work. So that's what I'm like hoping to have, that ongoing communication and transparency that really helps to all sides to get done well.
Thanks, Anya. And I think, you know, something this is even bringing up for me as, you know, reflecting on my recruitment efforts, is I've always thought of, I think we often think of our recruitment efforts as like separate, distinct things. Like, each study or project is like a new recruitment effort. And I think that, you know, what I'm hearing today is that we really need to we might need to shift our mindset around that, and that this is like a long-term. I see a comment in the chat about there being no final report, and there's like iterations as work evolves, and thinking about things, you know, more long-term and holistically, rather than these like distinct recruitment efforts, might go a longer way towards building in these research partnerships. Sarah, I see your hand, and it would be great to hear from you and Renat about practically how a researcher could really go about building relationships with all of these different people that are needed in order to make the study successful within the district.
Absolutely. I think, as we're, you know, from the point of view of trying to protect against obstacles to the project due to personnel changes on the district side, 3 things that I think are really important are documentation. Have all of your documentation ready to go. what agreements have you signed? What email chains were there? What documents did you put together? Be able to show someone new coming into the position or coming into the project, just a very thorough recap of what's happened so far. The second thing that's so important is, again, if you've been delivering some interim findings as you've gone along, that can be a really enticing way to get someone excited about continuing to stay involved. And then finally, I think it's what's the reputation that you or your organization has within the district? Is it one, I think, and Anya just touched on this so well in terms of that longevity, like coming back around and really thinking about, is this useful? The more connected to a strategic priority as opposed to an individual's interest your project is, the more likely that you won't be as interrupted by those obstacles.
Well, that's such a good distinction between a shared strategic priority and like one person's, individual interest or role. Thanks for that. Renat, go ahead.
It's interesting. We have a situation actually happening right now where a very, very important person in our district left after many successful years as the head of the early literacy group, which is a really important priority. And there's an ongoing research project to study a tier 3 intervention for early elementary. This project is so important strategically. There's been not a glitch in this research project because, it's so important, it's just not going to get dropped. It wasn't somebody's pet interest. It's so deeply rooted, and this project is so important, and the schools are so invested. So I think that's an example of how, because it was a well-selected project with deep roots in the district and top of mind for everybody, it's just continuing without a blip.
And then Dana, you had, I think, asked also, like, how do you build relationships? And from my perspective, I would say, when researchers come to us and want to learn about what's happening in the district, when researchers come to us with curiosity about what our priorities are, when researchers come to us and want to understand why we're making the choices that we do, when researchers come to us as learners, I find that is a much more fruitful start to a relationship. Too often, I think researchers come in telling me that they can solve a problem. Maybe a problem that I know I have, maybe a problem I didn't know I have, but they come in to tell me or my district colleagues that we're doing something wrong and they can identify it and fix it for us. And I understand the impulse to do that, the impulse to, when you see something, say something, to say, I can help. But the power dynamics there, I think, are not great because it puts the district in this position of, well, shoot, I guess I've been doing it wrong, which may or may not be the case, right? And I think that I always appreciate relationship building when it comes to, hey, I work in education research. You are a district in my sphere somehow. I'd love to learn about what's going on in your district and see if there are ways that we might be able to partner together at some point, as opposed to coming and diagnosing what Chicago Public Schools is doing wrong as the entry point to a conversation. Build the relationship based on shared values, shared priorities, and a shared curiosity about how can we all think about what's best for the young people we serve.
Great, thank you. Thanks for circling back to that. I wanted to shift a little bit to got some very practical questions in the chat, and something we talked a little bit about in the brief and that I'd love to hear from the panelists' perspective on that I don't think we've touched on so far is random assignment. So one question that we have seen in the chat is that some district IRBs have said they will not consider studies that use random assignment. Has anyone else been encountering this, and what have been any successful strategies employed to overcome this barrier?
I mean, I feel like oh, Anya, please go ahead. I feel like I've been speaking too much.
Okay.
You go first. Absolutely, you go first.
I wanted to offer perhaps maybe an insight into why your districts are concerned with randomization. Maybe this is well known, but in Chicago Public Schools, we don't automatically deny RCTs or randomize or projects with randomization, but we do really think deeply about it, especially because in so many cases there's a treatment and a control group. So what is the benefit to the students who are part of the control group for participating in the study? Oftentimes we want to see, like, if there's an intervention, a curriculum, some sort of benefit that students in the treatment group are getting, we want to have a promise that the students in the control group will also get that benefit at a later date perhaps, but we want to see that, you know, whatever benefit was being provided to the treatment group will eventually be provided to the control group. The other thing that we sometimes see with randomization is that the requirements on the control group are actually quite stringent, right? Sometimes researchers want to see students or staff in the control group not receiving similar services to the intervention that's being proposed. And especially when it comes to things that are interventions for, you know, dealing with trauma or dealing with literacy or these things, like, no, I will not approve something that says that the district can't provide alternate services to any of our students, right? That shan't be something that gets my sign off. And so that's, I think, something that's really tricky. And then I think also it can be what I have found is that researchers who are trying to deal with randomization in our district just end up getting really frustrated because our students are very mobile. They move around a lot. Things change, principals change, school leadership changes, like lots of things change. And so we're not a laboratory, y'all. We're a school district. We're not perfect experimental subjects. We're serving students who are humans. And I think that the rigidity around randomization can be very difficult to mesh well with the district. And it is very frustrating. The last thing I'll say about this is it is very frustrating to hear anyone arguing with me about why we should make a policy decision that impacts our students for the benefit of randomization. That's not going to go over well. And I know that that's often coming from a really good spot in a researcher's heart, and often coming from a really good spot in terms of following the guidance that they've received for the funding that they're receiving. But that's just not a compelling argument to me, and I don't think it ever will be.
Thanks, Sarah. I know we've gotten a lot of good responses in the chat too about how people have dealt with this, such as you know, shifting to quasi-experimental designs, crossover designs, having a, you know, wait list comparison group that receives the intervention later. So just want to acknowledge all of those helpful responses and sharing that's going on in the chat as well. Anya, go ahead.
So, you know, this is always a conversation, and this is where the trust building and having those conversations early on and being transparent what the study is and what does it require, and having those conversations early on is so very, very important. And I totally agree with Sarah, the point is not to take anything away. That is not something that, you know, would be, in my mind, ethical. You cannot go to a place and say, hey, we don't want you to do something any longer because I want to be doing this randomized control trial. It just doesn't make any sense, right? So it's just not the right way of, even in my opinion, even thinking about it. Randomization should not be about taking things away from kids or schools, but it is potentially about adding something. And it is a conversation. It has to be done, you know, case by case. And throughout the time that I have been recruiting and having conversations with many school districts, there have been a few districts that really from the beginning said that they just don't, you know, would not do it. And if my study design basically requires that I have to do random assignment, we have this conversation, and the conversation is always that's fine, right? It's perfectly okay. This opportunity is not just the one that you want to participate in, but let's see, we are more than happy to come back to you later when we have something else that, you know, would be fitting into your policy environment and the context and how you want to do research. It's not the end of it. This is just the beginning of the conversation, and it doesn't mean that our partnership of doing research in the future or having any other opportunities in the future would be somehow limited. So it's a project by project, is the research, you know, one at a time. So I kind of hate to put even too much pressure and kind of an idea that this is a one-time opportunity to partner with someone, and if this randomization for some reason doesn't work and is not something that the district can, you know, abide with, that is an end of conversation that we have about doing research together in the future. It just doesn't work that way.
Thanks, Sonia. Jason, go ahead, weigh in.
Yeah, Anya said a lot of what I was actually going to say. The thing I would, add add one thing and emphasize something, reemphasize the point she made. Not only is withholding services from a control group that they'd otherwise get unethical, it is answering the wrong question. What in the policy question does this possibly answer? If you're providing an intervention or a set of supports, the question is, what does this improve over, what does the effect of this over business as usual? So why would you want to take over? That doesn't make any sense from an applied research standpoint, and clearly from an ethical standpoint. The other thing is, I really agree with what Anya said about not every opportunity is right for every district. And sometimes you say, well, let's think about other projects because this doesn't align with the way you like to work, and we understand. And then finally, I think that the value proposition of random assignment depends on the value proposition of the learning from the study for the district, whatever, not because of my grant requirements, not because of, that I want to meet standards without reservations, but this is what I think we would learn with this, and this is why I think it would be a benefit to the district. And if that isn't worth, and this is something that the kids would get over and above what they would otherwise get. And, if we can, depending on the design, we can give it to the next cohort of kids. And if we can, depending on that, we can give it to the treatment, the control kids later. But the real question is, like, does the way of doing it actually add value to things you want to learn as a district entity? But also, I really don't engage and don't think people should engage in kind of fighting with districts over this. If they're the district that just generally says, we don't do student random assignment, okay, let's find other ways to learn. Let's do a different design. Let's think about it. Maybe it's possible that school level random assignment works, and it's more comfortable and it's kind of more simple, more aligned with how things might be rolled out in a district, in a school, throughout a district anyway. And again, maybe that's a different project or what have you. But if you have a project that's a certain design and doesn't align with the values of a district, then, thank them for their, considering your conversation, and think about opportunities to work together in the future to build knowledge in different ways.
Love that. Not every project is a fit for every district. And I think that you could all bear to keep that in mind. Renat, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I sort of wish we did more random research projects, but what it would require, and what my experience has been is that I'll find out a little bit too late that somebody's already started, like a leader in the district has already purchased a program or started something and has already assigned the schools, and then they're asking several months later, oh, can we do some research on this? And if you just told me, maybe we could have hired, brought someone early to help us design and do randomize the selection of students. And I think this goes back to the relationship question, and that's on my end too, is if you need a lot of lead time because things are moving so quickly and people are buying things, trying things out. But if you had a relationship with that person, you could say, the next time you're thinking of starting something new, let's build a study first. And here's the 2 or 3 year plan. Like the first year will be random, and then using the results, we can decide whether you're going to continue. But that just, the timing almost never works.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. More random assignment, maybe, depending on the context. All right, I know we're getting close to 2:30 to our time wrapping up. And there are lots of questions in the chat that we weren't able to get to. So before we wrap up, I will share the email address for myself and for the panelists in case anyone wants to reach out to follow up. But just to close us out here, invite all of our panelists to think back to either their first recruitment experience or their first experience with study participation. And what is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew then back in your first experience with this? So I will just say, Renat, do you want to start us off? Not to put you on the spot.
Just, I think I'm thinking back to the research project we did with Mathematica. It was a lot of work. So I think just knowing that when we are doing a fairly serious research project that involves federal funding, just to be really ready to go all in.
Mhm. Definitely. Sarah, what about you? What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew earlier on?
I wish I had known that there is no right to access CPS student, staff, or data for research purposes. We can always say no if it's not the right fit for our district.
Right. I know that, data and privacy is something we didn't even get to touch on much, but it's also an important aspect of this conversation. Jason, what about you? Anything you wish that you knew back when you were first starting out?
Yeah, I think that in a couple studies, I learned the hard way that there is no amount of attention to site level, classroom level, uptake and a buy-in that is too much. This is the key thing in this study. And even you can have a great conversation at the district level with the district leaders and maybe even at the principal level. But really to actually be successful and to learn something meaningful, you really have to plan for the effort to see what's happening at the classroom level and the extent to which what you have, tried to study is actually occurring in the classroom, and what are the things that are getting in the way of that and not getting, and facilitating it. Because sometimes you're spending, lots of money and you complete a study and it looks like no one did the thing. And then you look at the impacts and you say, well, the thing doesn't work. And actually you have no idea if the thing works. You just know that people didn't, that with people not doing it, it doesn't work. And so that just requires just a level of attention to these relationships. And I think along with all of that is this undercurrent that like building trust and by providing supports outside of what benefits you as a trying to complete a study, and just working on the relationship aspects of the district at every level, and not just after you get buy-in, but continuing to work on that is just tremendously important for getting work done, and for just also say you complete a study, having people use the study. Back when I was in grad school, I had the favorite statistic. The average number of readers per economic journal article at that point. I usually like to look at guess, but I'll tell you, it was less than 1. So who's our audience? It's these people we're working with. This is our most important audience. So which means you have to maintain the trust in the relationship so that when you're telling them what you're learning, because it might be counterintuitive to what they've seen before, that they can have a real conversation about it.
Thanks, Jason. I did not know that, and that is a good stat to keep
I don't
in
know.
mind.
It's probably improved now because of I went to graduate school in the Paleolithic era. So
I'll have to look up an updated stat. All right, Anya, what about you? One thing that you wish you knew back when you were first starting with this work?
It's not so much what I wish I knew in the beginning, but I think what I have learned over time is few things. Recruitment definitely is not a sales job. It's not. You don't go out there to convince people to be participants in a research study. It is a relationship, trust building. It is partnership. It has to align. Like the planets just need to align. There needs to be the need. Your intervention needs to be something which is a top priority, or whatever you're wanting to do in your study, whether it's an implementation, intervention, program, strategy, whatever it is that you're trying to implement. It has to be pretty much on the top priority of the district's needs and their priorities, and the same for the schools. There is no faking on it, right? And you need to be really transparent, and you should not be sugarcoating anything. Like, you need to be able to really communicate what the real deal is, and have that authentic relationship building, which is like, we are working on this together. I'm not going to be telling you this is not something I'm telling you so that I would get you to participate in this study. It's like, I'm telling you how it is. So when we are doing this together, we are all kind of new from the beginning what we are getting into, and this is a long-term relationship. We are building this trust and this relationship, and it's going to be lasting for years. So that is key to me, is that it's not a short-term thing that just kind of gets you there. It is that a longer term process where you're gradually building that trust, not just with the district champion, but with the whole team, the schools, everything, so you can get the implementation done. And recruitment to me is the key piece of a study, in a sense that if you can do the recruitment and the relationship building so well, just like Jason said, then the implementation looks good. You can do the data collection, and actually more you spend resources and time in your recruitment, you might be spending less resources and time later on in your project in like things like data collection or implementation oversight, because you have the buy-in. So it's like you need to invest early and invest heavily, so you don't have to invest so much later on and in other activities. So that would be the lessons that I learned for sure over the years.
Thanks, Anya. I hopefully reshared my screen. Can everyone see my slides? I think I might have done it wrong. 1 second.
No, you did it right. Whatever you did, you could do that again.
Got it. Okay. Sorry about
And
that.
I think Renat had one final thought.
Oh, sorry.
I did. If it's okay, if I could squeeze in
Yeah,
one more.
go ahead.
One more learning that I just thought of is that it can be really surprising the range of understanding people have about research. And I think being ready to have some analogies and some simple language just to bring everybody up to speed. I've been surprised. Some people really get it, and some people are really not understanding. They don't understand research language. And so I think just coming with a shopping bag of clear language and analogies to help make it clear is something I feel like I wish I had and we need.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't see your note. This has been just such a great discussion. I wish we had more time to continue, but really appreciate everyone's thoughtful questions and our panelists for all of your, insightful responses. We're excited about the energy about this topic, and we hope that this was a productive discussion. As I said, if you have follow-up questions, contact information for everyone is on the slide. And then the slide also includes a link to the SEER webinar series where you can find recordings for other webinars about generalizability, Bayesian methods, data sharing, implementation, and context features. And then the recording from today's webinar will also be posted on the same page. Just want to again thank IES, SRI, and APAM for co-sponsoring this session, and then our panelists for joining today. So hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and wishing you the best in all of your recruitment and research participation efforts. So thanks, everyone.